Hello, my name is Matthew Janasek, and I'm a United States history teacher, an educator, a father, wannabe musician, songwriter, storyteller. Um, I've been inspired to put a series of videos together to try to help explain, um, from the perspective of a U.S. history teacher, what's been happening in the United States in the recent times that we've been in. Um, and large part of my inspiration is many of my students reaching out and asking me to help them explain what forces are at work out there and how they best can navigate in it. And so, what I hope to accomplish here is really an adventure. It's going to be an adventure in critical thinking. It's going to be a few parts that I want to put together that will hopefully shed some light on how to approach all the complexities of the modern world, uh, and maybe approach it with a sense of humility in what we do know and what we don't know, and kind of a way to process all of the forces at work. Um, so I titled part one here, How Do We or Can We Know What's Actually Happening? Um, and a process of how to think, not what to actually think in this really complicated world. So, and how do you begin to unpack? Where do you start? And that can be really overwhelming in a world of information that young people are inundated with, and that all people are inundated with on a daily basis. Um, the idea that I like to convey early in a school year would be that what are we really learning this for? What's the purpose? Um, and establishing that tone at the beginning, and that we all are in search of what could just be called the truth. You want to know what the truth is, that ultimate truth. One way to quickly get there is to understand that uh, it's going to be a lifelong journey, and that you'll never really know what the meaning of life is, i.e., the truth, until the end. And hopefully, we get to find out, and we don't know even beyond that. So, what the truth should maybe be, in the pursuit of that truth, is going to be greatly dependent upon our own point of view. And probably the first way we can begin to look at how different people begin to think about this pursuit of truth, and what point of view they might be entering the discussion with, is really from a spiritual or secular point of view. Um, Human history seems to be obviously in polarity, and there is good and evil, and there are tugs of war back and forth, and the idea of polarity in the spiritual and secular organization of things, it really is going to impact the way people view the modern world. So, personally, as a Christian man, I look at the world through a spiritual lens. Now, do you have to be a Christian to appreciate spiritualism? I don't think so. So, what it is it's an interconnectedness of all things. We're aware of it. We can't quite say what it is, but we are sort of feeling of both, maybe an intellectual feeling and a heartfelt feeling, that there is an interconnectedness between all things. And that humility that you don't quite know what it is, I think, is refreshing. Now, there's that spiritual way of looking at things, I guess. And then there might be, on the other flip side of that, the secular way of looking at things, that the pursuit of truth doesn't maybe exist in the spiritual world. It's only what we can see concrete before our own very eyes all the time. And that secular worldview and the search for truth, who's going to provide those answers then, is going to be an important answer to a question. Okay? Somebody's going to have to provide that answer to the truth, and that means somebody's always going to be able to claim it. So this tug of war back and forth, and I love that Proverbs from the Bible. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Okay, I, humility, when you realize you don't have all the answers, and there's no way you're ever going to know them, that really tempers people and would have the power to temper people if they understood it. And I guess in the secular world, since we do like to associate, and Hollywood's good at it, and storytellers are good at it, associating Star Wars with the Holy Trinity, even. You have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit there. And in this Star Wars connection, you have the Father, essentially, not there, the Son, Luke, and the teacher, Yoda, and the Holy Spirit, Ben Kenobi, your conscience. And one of the ways I get people to think about things at the beginning is also, interestingly, when you talk to your conscience or yourself, I always ask my students, does your conscience ever really lie to you when you are in a moral situation? Does your inner voice that is speaking to you, does it ever really lie? Generally speaking, most people have the answer of no. It really just depends on if we're going to follow the instruction of that inner voice, really, or not. And I guess that's the way I get people to think about spiritualism in general, and without telling anybody what you have to think. All right, it's just potentially an interconnectedness of all things. And one of the coolest ways I love to get to that big idea is just with two of the greatest questions that I personally have. And if you're a curious person that really thinks deeply about things, you've been taught, I was taught as a young person, that the Big Bang Theory really is how the universe was created. And that's it. It's an open and shut case. This is what happened. And as I began to get more mature, I thought, well, I wonder what happened before the Big Bang. Who lit the fuse? Was there a fuse? Like too many questions were rattling around in my head for the expanse of the universe. And the other one is on the microscopic level in the existence and order of DNA in the organization. And the fact that this, I think in the 1970s, I believe, was when DNA was officially like sequenced for the first time. And just when you look at the strand of DNA, the idea that just sort of manifested through science on its own, the fact that the Big Bang just exploded one day and something happened and the universe was created, the idea that there are no actual definitive answers to those two major questions should just make people curious to search for the truth and what that might be. No answer provided can be 100% objective. And when people are looking for those 100% objective answers, the only two spheres of life that have attempted to answer those questions of the meaning of life is organized religion and governments. Those are your only choices, and this is where it connects back to the spiritual versus the secular. And is there a happy median in those? So basically, if you understand this humbles you very quickly from the beginning. There's no way you're going to know the full truth. But the search for it is really a way of life. And you become aware of all the things as you learn more. You become aware of more things that you don't know, which in the end humbles you. I loved this when I was researching more ancient history of late. What we don't know. Thinking we do know things about ancient Egypt or ancient archaeology or the cradle of civilization. What archaeologists are discovering now is that all this is going to probably have to be rewritten. I love the relief on the, I believe that's in Abydos, Egypt. I could be wrong, but where I look and I see what amounts to a helicopter, what amounts to a saucer-looking thing in an Egyptian ruin. This would be Göbekli Tepe, which archaeologists date now at over 10,000 years to 13,000 years old, maybe. And the Bosnian Pyramid, okay, is estimated to be about 20,000 years old. Now, what were we all taught as young kids? The cradle of civilization was in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, and that was about 7,000 years ago. And there's Sumerians, and that's it. And they gave us hieroglyphics, and that's where it all started. What we're learning is it's just not the case. And what we're aware now that things are going to have to be looked at again. And then we're also aware that we're not even allowed to know certain things. We have an FBI or a CIA and an intelligence apparatus that knowingly keeps secrets from us, and we know they keep secrets from us. So all the things that we're aware that we don't know would create balance in our action, our decision making, our choices that we're going to make, the way that we approach who to believe and who not to believe when we're trying to figure out what's happening in this world right now. And then you need to look at the things that we do know that we can concretely verify as 100% truth, essentially the objective historical record. What has been written down? Pearl Harbor got bombed, everyone. It happened December 7th, 1941. Here's the reasons it happened, and here's some of those effects. Now, those can be mildly negotiable, but at the end of the day, that's the historical record, and you're not going to be arguing with what actually happened. So, we can learn from people, we can learn from history, but at the end of the day, we can never know the full truth. So what's the best we can do? We've essentially come up with a system of order in the United States, and we'll talk about this in a later segment, but you can have order, you can have chaos, and everybody talks about critical thinking. All schools talk about critical thinking. We love critical thinking. Goal is to get our kids thinking critically, and okay. Trouble with critical thinking is when we do it effectively, we evaluate evidence and we draw conclusions. We make judgment calls. We make inferences. We state claims that are grounded in reason and logic. And then we guide those things for our future. The trouble with critical thinking is it actually leads to ideas, and ideas will need to maybe be developed. And it'll point us in a direction. Essentially, that direction is going to be in the form of politics. It'll be toward a policy. And again, we're not going to teach ever what to think, but we're going to teach how to think here. And in our system that we've established here, the rule of law and order, if we don't have the rule of law, we are going to have chaos reign in the end. And what we are seeing out there is a tolerance for that chaos growing. And there are many people to blame for this, and we will discuss that again in later discussions. What I hope to approach here with you is really how the American founding fathers and what eventually, I guess, was established as basic core American values reflected by many of the founding fathers could be found in their classical educational upbringings. I picked up along the way of teaching, I believe from Joseph Ellis, that all the founding fathers had to memorize Cicero's essay on virtue. So as a teacher, I said, I wonder what's in that thing that makes it so good. So I investigated, and basically Cicero discussed the four cardinal virtues: justice, prudence, fortitude, and temperance. Justice meaning you need to know the difference between right and wrong, and there is a difference between right and wrong, and there are clear rights and clear wrongs. That when approaching right and wrong, a sense of justice, when you make decisions, in every abstract situation you're sort of presented with, you should know what the right and wrong thing to do is in each one of those situations. That would dictate your prudence in decision making. The idea that the fortitude you would have, your internal strength, your mental, your emotional strength, when you are going to face adversity in life, when you're going to face tragedy, is going to be able to withstand that. You have to be a strong person, physically, mentally, emotionally. And that temperance, when you develop this awareness, you would be able to essentially control your passions and self-restraint. And these classic ideas by Socrates and Cicero are essentially the classic connection to Western civilization, right? And establishing a moral code and a civic code. And the interesting thing about both these men, though, is they both got killed. And why did they get killed? They got killed for critical thinking. They got killed for challenging the status quo in their societies, and they asked potentially unsettling questions to people in power. What are we seeing happen? The same thing. When did the founding fathers do that? When they realized it was time to break away from England, and they took their lives into their own hands. So Western Civ's essential principles are the classical elements that we just discussed briefly, and then we're going to add the Renaissance stuff to it, okay? In Western Civ's essential principles, value of the individual matters, and individual matters, and they have rights. As we piggyback Western Civ essential principles like this with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment period, we'll understand these are going to enter the political world. And the Magna Carta really signifying that in 1215, which limited the monarch's power for the first time in human history. And people begin to tolerate questioning certain truths that were already given to us through answers by governments and or the church. And knowledge of the world is beginning to grow. The Renaissance man, reflected by Leonardo da Vinci there. But also another great, just wonderful Renaissance figure is Martin Luther, who thought for himself, hey, you probably shouldn't be selling heaven. And these people that are questioning things, sometimes it costs them almost everything, and sometimes it costs them their lives. Nearly Galileo, it nearly cost him his life. This is what it was going to take to move things. But value of the individual can't be over exaggerated. So the American colonial beginnings, because we need to understand what's happening in the United States. And from 1607, when the first settlers set foot in Jamestown, Virginia, and when in the northern colonies, the Puritans landed to create a religious haven, you basically had what amounts to early English colonization, what is going to be demonstrated through a north-south window and lens as well. And throughout the American colonial development, Enlightenment principles prospered here. The British government largely left the American colonies alone for 150 years to develop on their own, and they just became effective. We just became effective at governing ourselves. We had to tame the wilderness. We had a common enemy in the Native Americans, essentially, which was one of the common features that brought everyone together. The society was extremely religious, north and south, just to varying degrees. It had a sense of community in the north and a sense of individualism developing in the south. We were going to eventually have out of this a great awakening, religious revival. People had to be 100% self-reliant. What you had in the American colonial development period is a kind of a forging of an American character and identity, really in secret for 150 years. So just to wrap up part one here, because I'm going to bust this into a few different parts. So if you're interested, we can check out part two later tomorrow. But part one here, you guys, the search for the truth is never going to end. It's never going to end. And we're not even going to know it when we die. We hope we discover it. We hope with what we have chosen to put faith behind is going to pacify, right, and take care of us. We are all connected in some way, shape, or form. It's just that anybody that claims that they have all the right answers right there to give you, the best advice I've ever gotten is you run from those people. Your point of view as we approach problems, the point of view of people in the discussion is going to impact their own truth. Even if it doesn't make sense, we're obliged to try to understand that and figure it out. Recognize our own ignorance in this world, what we don't know. Recognize all the things we don't know. This is when you can begin to think critically. And if we're going to begin to unpack the United States in greater detail, we do have to understand the founding principles of the characters of some of the people that went into it based on the concept of civic virtue. We're going to talk about that more, and the tenets, larger scale of Western civilization and the value of the individual. And our Republican experiment that began in 76 is still ongoing. And we are the longest enduring republic in world history, and we're still very young. I think what's motivated me to help put this together is I do feel that there are real threats to the American Republic right now. And they're out there. And we need to recognize them and share knowledge with one another and move toward a better place, because this is the greatest country that has ever existed for the freedoms of man and the natural rights of all of us. And we have an imperfect past, but one of the cool things about the United States is we're always working to make ourselves better. And yet we need to stay within the confines of the framework that got us to this point. That'll be next. I'll talk to you guys later.